Welcome to the Nightlife Podcast. Have you ever dismissed a dream as just the pizza? Or your brain processing information while you sleep? More than we realize, our dreams are a goldmine of divine revelation hidden for us to discover, explaining deep mysteries in pictures and stories created for us by God. Once you realize this gift that has been yours all along, you'll never go back to spending the nightlife just sleeping. I've been so inspired interviewing other dreamers, and each time I end up convinced that they, not me, should be the ones with this podcast. Today's episode is no different, and I'll own up front that I felt less like a colleague and more like a kindergartner sitting at the feet of John Thomas as we talk today. I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. John is the president of Streams Ministries just outside of Dallas, where he lives with his wife, Donna. He's author of several books and has also written courses on prophetic ministry, dream interpretation, and the kingdom of God. He ministers internationally with the vision of restoring the awe of God to a world that has lost its wonder. It was such an honor to be able to interview John, even as he graciously endured inexplicable Zoom glitches on my end. Please make sure you check out the Streams Ministries website, which I'll link in the show notes. John, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to see where this conversation goes.
Yeah, me too. So I'd love to hear your history with dreaming and at what point in your life you really started engaging with your dreams.
You know, it's kind of interesting. I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, so I don't remember anything about dreams as a kid other than I have this one memory of some Disney characters turning into vampires and chasing me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was not a fun dream. I mean, I was very young. I don't even remember what age it was, but that was not a lot of fun. But that tells you a lot about kind of the spiritual experiences that I had. They were not real fun. But when I encountered the Lord, I had this radical experience. I started going to a church. It was discipling me. This guy came as a guest speaker to that church, and his name is John Paul Jackson. And he started talking about how we hear from God, which I'd heard about at the church. But then he specifically started talking about dreams and visions. And I had not really thought of that as an important thing up to that point. But having then taken one of his seminars, I got this little tape set that he had on dreams and visions. And I started listening to it. And suddenly I started having dreams on a regular basis. And then I would have random people walk up to me and say, "Hey, do you know anything about dreams? I had this dream I'm trying to figure out," which I realize now is not that normal, but I just didn't know any better at that time. I just thought that was normal.
So do you feel like there was some kind of gift imparted through what the teachings you were listening to?
I really do. I think it was a mix of the teachings I was listening to and then impartation. Having been to places and having people pray for me, his staff and John Paul praying for a release of dreams and visions, but something shifted and it started this journey that has been 28, 29 years now since that started. And man, I've found dreams are one of the subjects that is never ending. You can continue to explore, and I'm constantly finding new things that I've never thought about or heard about to this day. So that's fun.
Wow. So how often do you dream?
Depends on the season. Right now, I've had this odd season where I will wake up kind of feeling the atmosphere of a dream, but not being able to remember the dream.
Okay.
It just kind of feels like I was being instructed. So I'll have anywhere from 1 to 5 dreams that I will write down in a month. But I had a season of my life where I was writing 2 or 3 dreams down every single night.
Right. I've experienced that too. So since your dream life and your frequency ebbs and flows, I'm wondering if your seasons in your dream life follow the same pattern. Like, do you dream certain types of dreams in different seasons?
Yes. One of the things that I've learned, and I'm not even sure where I heard this because I don't remember it specifically being in the classes that I took, but whenever I notice there's a shift in my life, like, moving states, job change, I went from being on staff at a ministry to pastoring a church. I went from pastoring the church to doing itinerant ministry. So those big season shifts, I always go back and read through the dreams of the previous season. And I will find that a lot of the dreams that I couldn't understand were actually talking about the season I'm going into, but I couldn't understand it until I got into that season. And so I can definitely see those themes. And when I find that I have a whole season of dreams that have similar themes, but I'm not understanding it, now I start looking for what the next season is, because I have a feeling I'm being instructed for something that I don't know yet.
That's really good. And I've recently been understanding when I'm interpreting dreams, if it has to do with a future season, those are the pieces that seem elusive in my interpretation. And just to rest in that, I used to get so much angst. I knew it was saying something, but I couldn't grasp it, and it would feel frustrating. So when you do have significant dreams, what does your recording and interpretation process look like? Do you have to do it right away when you wake up, or will you remember it later?
I rarely will remember them later. There are some dreams that I will, but it's funny. I mean, like I said, I've been doing this for 29 years, and probably 20 of those I've been teaching about dreams, dream interpretation. And I know I'm supposed to write down a dream when I have it. When I forget to, I tend to have a couple weeks where I don't remember many dreams until I repent and, okay, I'll write it down. So if I don't write it down, I tend to miss it. And different season, like when I first started, I always had a notebook I'd keep by the side of my bed. Right now, what I'm using is Evernote. It's just a note-taking app, but
Yeah.
I love it because I can easily search by keywords. So I've got every dream that I've recorded in the last 10 years on Evernote now. I can just search. So I can search for my wife's name, and I can find every dream that had my wife in it. I can search for the name of our ministry, and I find every dream where I had that, or particular themes. And it makes it real easy to recognize those themes that happen, which are really important.
And doesn't Evernote have a feature where it will convert handwriting into text?
It does.
Is it very
Yes.
good?
I've not used it. I type because I can actually type faster than I can write.
Okay.
So I can type almost as fast as I think, but handwriting takes me a little bit longer. And my handwriting is not as good as it once was. I broke my wrist a couple times, and each time I did, my handwriting went away. So I tend to not handwrite very much anymore.
Yeah. Well, it's not much of a necessity these days,
That's
but
true.
my handwriting is not great. And especially in the morning when I'm groggy and recording my dreams. So I've actually thought about using the feature in Evernote to go back through all my old journals so that I could have them compiled digitally. But I've been doubtful that it could even read my handwriting. I'll have to try it sometime.
Yeah, that makes me curious. I never thought about going back to some of the old ones and importing in it. That's a great idea.
Yeah. So, do you have a favorite resource for interpreting dreams, like a dictionary, or have you been doing this so long where most of the meanings and symbolism just comes naturally to you?
It's more that it comes naturally. One of the things that I've found with dream dictionaries is so many of them say this means this. And it'd be much more helpful if they said it sometimes means
Right.
this. And it's ended up causing me and then different people that I've talked to misinterpret dreams so many times. So I will use a dream dictionary if I get stuck. But just looking at how something is created often tells me most of what it's going to mean in a dream. Whether it's created by God or even created by people. I mean, one of the kind of common ones we talk about are vehicles, because most people have vehicles in their dreams. And it usually will say that it means a ministry or a job, something that you're doing. But the idea behind a vehicle is it's what gets you from where you're at to where you're going. And that it was created to move us from one place to the next place. And I mean, that's exactly what our ministry, it's moving us towards destiny. It's exactly what our job is. It's moving us towards what it is, our purpose that we're fulfilling. Hopefully we're having a fulfilling job as well as providing for our families. but there's this purpose that's moving us towards something. And I've found that that's helped me when I find something that I can't find in a dream dictionary. And it usually helps to clarify some of the things that I find in them. So,
Yeah, that's really good. I make my own notes in the dictionary. Black, I constantly dream of being dressed in black, but
mhm,
most of the dictionaries say that's a bad thing. But
right.
that's when I'm
It's not all the
either
time.
in warfare, I'm in like a covert operation and I'm all in black like a sniper, or I'm in a black suit and it's
Mhm.
business or, kingdom
Yeah.
business or authority. So, yeah, I agree with you. It's like, it's so nuanced.
Yeah.
So, what about
Yeah.
ships? I don't really quite understand some of the
Yeah.
dreams I've had where I'm being loaded onto a ship. I've just been in the last year dreaming a lot of getting onto or about to set sail on a
Mhm.
really big ship. What does that mean?
Yeah. So, I mean, thinking about ships, again, it's a vehicle. So it's going to get us from one place to another place. Then the size of the ship is important. Like how many people can fit in a ship? If you've got a small ship, like a little sailboat, something, you could fit a couple people on it. That's going to be something a little bit more intimate, a little bit smaller. If it's a large cruise ship and there's thousands of people that's on it, that has a different meaning. So it could be a corporation, could be a ministry, it could be a purpose, but then thinking about what the ship is on, because why a ship and not a car? One of my favorite questions in dream interpretation is why this and not that? There's a reason why God would use that particular element. And so, the difference between a ship and a car, well, a car is on the land where a ship is on the water. Well, what does water represent? Well, water could represent something about the spirit. But in the book of Revelation, it represents the nations, it represents large groups of people. So it could be talking about the sea of humanity. It could be talking about something that's international, that's going to affect other shores. It's going to affect distant cultures or distant groups of people that seem distant, whether that's physically distant or emotionally distant or culturally distant, very different than where we're at. And so it's something that's going to impact those. And then I always take a look at the people that are involved. So if I'm getting on a ship, then who are the other people that are on the ship? If I recognize anybody, well, where do I recognize them from? Well, they're people from my church. Well, this is probably having to do with something religious, my spiritual life, the church, a ministry, a movement of churches. If it's people from the workplace, then it might be talking about a corporation, a business. If it's just random people, like they're people, and in the dream, I'm not thinking these are all strangers, they're just people. But when I wake up, I can't recognize any of them. It's just talking about, in general, people that are going to be impacted. It's not about a particular group of people per se. It's just that there are going to be people that are involved in it. And so looking at all those different things, is there something that's hindering the ship from moving? Is there something that's helping it? Is it being powered by the wind? Because that maybe that's saying that it's being powered by a move of the spirit or a wind of the spirit. Or is it being powered by engine? There's a mechanism that's built in that's getting it to where it's going. Or do we have to row, which means it's going to take our own effort? We're going to have to put our work into it, our strength into it to get it to where it's going. Those things all begin to kind of play into the meaning of a ship.
That's really good. I've never heard the question, why this and not that? I'm going to remember that. And that has been a question I've had, why a ship and not an airplane? I get it. It's
Yeah.
probably something international, but it might be one of those dreams that I'll look back because it's always in port. It's always in the part where everything and everyone is being loaded on, but I don't know where we're
Ah,
going.
so you're in a season of preparation.
Right.
Yeah.
And then speaking of ships and water, what about beaches? I
Yeah.
have a lot of dreams of, being on a beach. At one point interpreted the land as being stable and the sea as being chaotic. And one of
Mhm.
these was a political dream. So it was like I saw it as right on the line between stability and chaos in that situation. I just have a lot of dreams on beaches. So what do you make of that?
Yeah. The fun thing about dreams is the dream interprets itself. So my favorite question, well, what was the context? So what was happening on the beach? I'm fighting on the beach. That means one thing. I'm sunbathing on the beach. That's going to mean something else. I was the only person on the beach. That means one thing. There's a bunch of people on the beach. Whether I was trying to get into the water or whether I was trying to avoid the water, those are questions that I would ask that would have different meaning. Because, I mean, the beach, it could be a place of transition, a whole idea of something that's firm and then something that's unfirm, something that can support my weight, or something where I'm going to have to put some effort to be supported. That whole chaos versus stability, like that makes sense. The other thing is it could be just a place of relaxation, like the beach life. Like this is relaxing. This is beautiful. This is vacation time. This is a sense of beauty. The consistency of waves coming onto the shore. It could be talking about in the midst of everything else that's going on. There are things that are just consistent. But again, I mean, that would only mean that if the waves were what was being paid attention. I remember in the dream, well, we were on the beach, but what just struck me is I was constantly throughout the whole dream, I could hear the sound of the waves coming in. That's a specific meaning that you would have in that dynamic. Whether or not it was sunny out or whether it was dark or at night, like that's going to have a very different meaning. It means something better if it's sunny. If it's at night, that's a little bit more intimidating. That could be a negative thing. I mean, Jesus uses the comparison between during the day and during the night to talk about when God's will is being done and when the enemy's will is being done. So those are different things that I would ask about that particular piece.
Yeah, that's really good. I would love a relaxing beach dream. None of my dreams on the beach are relaxing. I'm always doing something. So it sounds like dreams are a primary way God speaks to you. Is that the case?
I don't know, I would say primary, but it's an essential way. I think the primary way for me is I just know stuff.
Okay.
I understand stuff that I shouldn't understand. I know stuff that I shouldn't know. But dreams are a very consistent way that he speaks. Yeah.
Do you ever have a dream confirm something you are knowing in the spirit?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do. I'm always careful with that because I know the possibility of creating dreams. I mean, the Bible talks about dreams that we cause ourselves to dream.
Right.
And so I make sure that that is not something that I have a vested interest in before I decide that it was actually God confirming it. If I already have a vested interest in it, I hold it very loosely and I look for something outside of myself to confirm it a little bit more than a dream, because I know how easy it is to create dreams without meaning to. So I definitely have had that happen multiple times.
Okay. Have you ever traveled somewhere and picked up on things in the spiritual atmosphere in that place in your dreams?
All the time. Not every time, but pretty consistently. I had to see when I first started to travel as an itinerant, when I would go into new places, it hasn't been happening recently as much, but if I would stay at a hotel, generally, the first night I would have dreams where it would just be a collection of scenes. Like I'd be in this space and there'd be kind of like a little cartoon panel. There'd be a message there, and then in another space, and then another space. I was basically just checking out the area, figuring out what was going on. And it gave me a sense of understanding what was happening in the environment, sometimes the church, but it was usually more about the location that I was in or the city. Usually the church would be something very different. That would only be a single scene dream. And usually those would happen in the week or two before I went there.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. Do you have any examples of dreams that have been impactful in your life that you want to share?
Yeah, actually, it's funny enough. Probably the most impactful dream was one of my wife's dreams
Okay.
instead of one of mine, but I can remember it as if it was my own dream. Like I've shared it, we've talked about it enough. I can almost picture it when I talk about it. But we were living in Phoenix, Arizona at the time, which is where she grew up, where I met the Lord, where we met, we got married, we were discipled at a church there. And we were realizing like we need to grow, we need to continue to develop these giftings that God has given us. And we'd made the decision that we were going to move to New Hampshire, which at the time that's where John Paul Jackson was with Streams Ministries, so that we could be around and learn, be a part of the teams, practice ministering. So that's kind of the background for it. In the dream, she's walking into the church that we attended, and it was just like it was at that period of time. And when she walks in, the big foyer, if you go off to the right, there's hallways that went on either side, sanctuary in front of you. But to this side over here, there are bathrooms at this end, bathrooms at this end. She was going towards the bathroom, but there was some adult education classes there. And she sees John Paul standing in one of the classrooms, and he's talking to somebody. And she's thinking, oh, that's interesting. John Paul's here to teach a class on dreams and visions. I didn't know that he was coming here. I wonder if he knows that we're going to be moving up there. But he was busy talking to somebody, and she didn't want to interrupt. So she just kept on going, and she walks into the bathroom. John Paul follows her into the bathroom in the dream. And he's got this clipboard in his hand that she'd seen him have when he was having a conversation. And he goes, Donna, I heard that you and John are going to be moving up to New Hampshire to help us in doing what we're doing for the kingdom. I have something that's going to help you. And he pulls off a pre-printed name tag that has her name on it and says, here, this one's yours. And then he pulls one off that had my name on it. Here, this one is for John. He goes, oh, you're going to need something else. Go over there. And he points towards the part of the bathroom where there was one of those decorative ficus trees that was there. And so when she goes over there, this gift starts to come out of the wall. And so she grabs the gift and she's like, wow, that was really cool. And he goes, oh, now go over there. And that happened a few different times. Gifts would come. And he goes, what God is doing is amazing. We're going to need some more help. And he gets on the phone. And she knows that he's calling the offices. And within seconds, a number of the people that we'd seen at seminars and we knew there were staff at Streams, comes into the bathroom. And then everybody's kind of receiving and giving these gifts through the walls. Some people are standing on top of the sinks. They're going through the ceiling. It's just all this beautiful activity. And somebody's like, what God is doing is really amazing. We need to praise him. And then everybody starts worshiping and she wakes up from the dream.
Wow.
So that dream was one, it was really important because in her family, for 2 generations, nobody had lived more than 45 minutes from where we were at there in Phoenix, Arizona. So for her to move to the other end of the country, New Hampshire, so she needed that courage. But it was also prophetic because when we got up there, we didn't think we were going to be on staff at Streams. We were just going up there to learn. We get a phone call a couple months after we got up there. Hey, we're wondering if Donna would be willing to come to work for us. We need somebody in customer service. And so she gets her pre-printed name tag. A few months after that, I get a phone call. Hey, we've been noticing, there's some calling on your life. We've been seeing some things. We're wondering if you would come and help us out. We need somebody to oversee our partners, the people that support the ministry financially. And so I got my pre-printed name tag.
Wow.
And that season, we had so much impartation and growth in spiritual giftings. And it was in that community of people, a lot of those people that she saw in those dreams, and some of them that she didn't know at the time, but we met once we got to New Hampshire. Like there was so much spiritual activity going on. That dream was so clear and such a marker. It was just a lot of fun.
So what was the significance of being in the bathroom with all of this activity?
Because there was going to be some inner healing that we were going to need to go through. There were some issues that we were going to have to get out of us to be able to fully enter into what God wanted to do.
Okay, that's really good. What did you interpret the gifts passing through the walls as?
The spiritual activity. So spiritual gifts that were just supernaturally being received and being given, because they were not only coming in, but also being sent back out. And there was a significant amount, like we started seeing stuff that we'd read about in books and we'd heard people talk about testimonies. We were starting to see it happen in that season. It was pretty significant, the change that we saw, which was really fun.
How did it look different from when you went to the close of that season?
That's a really good question. Some of the gifts, there is a maturity that things grow. So we were operating in a preschool level of certain gifts, like prophetic gifting. There was prophetic gifting there, but it was more random. It was not necessarily that I knew how to press in for prophetic gifting. I would sometimes have a word of knowledge, but it wasn't a consistent thing. By the end of that season, the ability to really recognize what God was saying and being able to minister that to someone else, it went from a few words to chapters. The details, being able to see, I started hearing people's names. I started getting details of what had happened in their lives 6 months before, knowing when it had happened, knowing when things were going to be happening, recognizing what God was doing. So there was a significant increase there. Again, I probably had maybe a handful of physical healings. And at the end of that season, we went through a period, actually, at the end of that season, we were there for about 2 years and we started pastoring a church. That church that we pastored, we went through a period of 2 years where I can count on one hand the number of services where someone did not get healed. So it went from like this level to this level, but the seer gift really exploded. The ability to see, like, for the very first time, I saw something in the physical realm. Like, I'd had kind of the internal, like, in my mind, I can see, and it looks like it's there, but I know that it's in my mind, to something was physically there, but it was spiritual. And that was the first time that had ever happened. So that opened up, and I had an open-eyed vision at one point where I'm in a room and worship is going on. There's ministry that's happening, and I'm fully aware of the room, of what's going on in the room. At the same time, I'm having a vision of being in a heavenly encounter, and I'm fully aware of that, both of them at the same time. And that had never happened before. That was brand new. And then dream interpretation. I think before that season, I would get an element of the dream and I would kind of prophesy out of an element of the dream, but I wasn't really understanding the dream and how the dream fit together and actually interpreting dreams. I was more prophesying out of dreams. And some of that, I know there's a spiritual impartation, but also there was a lot of learning and being trained. But I moved from prophesying out of dreams to really being able to interpret dreams. My wife has probably one of the most accurate and defined gifts of discernment that I have seen, and I watched that increase significantly. And then the inner healing, like we had to deal with some rejection issues and insecurities, and a lot of that came up during that season. We were able to get through. We actually went through inner healing with an inner healing ministry, as well as what the Lord walked us through in our personal devotions with Him. And so between those, there was a change as well, which all of that really helps to clarify the gift. Because when the soul is in a broken state, in an unhealed state, it kind of pollutes or taints spiritual gifting to some extent. And so getting that healing, it began to clarify some things and make it easier to step into some of the things that God had for us.
Is inner healing part of the school or the equipping that they had up there at that time?
Not specifically. It was an assumed thing that sometimes happened with some of the people, but it wasn't a focus. I've been so helped by it, but I've now made it a focus because I now run that ministry because John Paul passed away. So it's now one of our focuses and something that we train on and equip people for. But at that time, it was just kind of, it would happen accidentally and usually through prophetic. It'll tell you a little bit about how that worked. But when John Paul first started in the ministry, he'd just gotten out of corporate America, and he heard the Lord say to open up a deliverance clinic. He had no idea what a deliverance clinic was. And so he was at, well, what does that mean? He goes, well, I want you to open up this office and I'm going to send people to you. And then you just say whatever I say. And when you say it, I'm going to set them free. He goes, okay, I can do that. And so that was how he started out in ministry. He opened up this deliverance clinic. The first person that ever came was a very pregnant woman that was looking for alternative birthing centers.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, he had to explain, no, it's not that kind of deliverance. It's a
Oh,
different kind
that's
of
funny.
deliverance. It's like he had so many people that wanted it. So that's always been a theme, though it's not been necessarily a primary teaching point.
I wanted to ask you about, you said you're primarily a knower in the spirit, and then you had a seer gift activated as well. Could the way people dream possibly help them understand their primary method of being spiritually receptive in their waking life? Does that make sense?
Wow, that makes sense. That's a really good question. And I don't know that I've really thought through that a whole bunch.
Because some people in dreams, it's like they know things,
Right.
And then some people, their dreams are very visual. In some dreams, they feel a lot. So I've never thought of this before until you're speaking, but I
Yeah.
wonder what that correlation is.
Well, it's interesting. Like I have dreams where I just kind of understand things in dreams, but usually it's more the picture and the story that is the message. I'm trying to think through of like different people that I've interpreted the dreams for. I will say that I have noticed a difference in the way people dream with certain spiritual giftings, but not necessarily. I can't say that I've seen that pattern in the way that they hear, whether it's seeing, whether it's knowing, whether it's hearing. But intercessors, people that spend a lot of time in prayer for other people in other places, they tend to have the most intense dreams. They tend to be longer. They tend to be more metaphorical in generals. I mean, there's exceptions. I've seen some people that were pretty literal, but in general, they seem to be more metaphorical. And another thing I've noticed is a lot of times for intercessors in their dreams, they actually represent something that they're praying for, which is really rare because usually in a dream, the dreamer is the dreamer. But in an intercessory dream, like I've seen, like we have had an intercessor here. She's had dreams where she actually represents the ministry. And I've recognized that pattern with intercessors specifically, that tends to be something. So there's a difference, I think, in certain giftings. People that do, actually, I will say, people that tend to be more seers, where what they see while they're waking tends to be more metaphorical. They also tend to have very metaphorical dreams. They're kind of the weirder dreams. Yeah, I saw a purple monkey swinging on the chandelier or something along those lines.
Right.
Just like that's really random and really odd. The people that tend to see kind of more odd things that are more metaphorical when they're awake also tend to have the more metaphorical dreams. I have noticed that, but that's the only correlation that I can say that I've recognized.
Okay, that's interesting.
Uh,
So, your intercessors who find themselves representing what they're praying or contending for in their dreams, how do they know? How would you explain that to someone to recognize that for themselves?
Well, there's a couple things that are hints. One, in general, the intercessor will be involved. There will be conversations and there will be actions as the dreamer in the dream. But those conversations and those actions rarely change the plot of the dream. So a lot of times when the dreamer, their actions are the plot of the dream.
Do you
Does
have
that
an
make sense?
example?
Like, I use a warfare dream where I'm fighting and I defeat the bad guy. And then suddenly, I walk into a room and all these people are really grateful. My action of defeating the bad guy changed the plot. Like there's a shift. Whereas, like, I had an intercessory dream. Somebody shared an intercessory dream and they were with a leader. They were walking with a leader. They were having a conversation. And what the leader did had some effect, but it was almost like they're observing, but they're in the dream. But there was other places where the leader wasn't there, but what they were representing. And so they're almost like they're observing the dream by being inside the dream. We talk about when we teach on dream interpretation, the difference between being the focus of the dream participating in the dream or being an observer in the dream. Generally, when you're observing, it's kind of like you're not in the dream and you're watching the dream, or you're kind of like what, we would think of in like some of the old movies where there was a ghost that was there and nobody could actually see them or hear them, where you're in the dream and you try to get somebody's attention and nobody even knows that you're there. That tends to be more of the observing dream.
Okay.
But for intercessors, they're actually in the dream a little bit more. And people know that they're there, but they're not specifically, their activity is not specifically changing the plot of the dream or affecting the plot of the dream.
Okay, that's interesting. It's reminding me of a dream I just heard from someone. They shared it with me that they think they actually went somewhere in the spirit in a dream. And I've had a few of those where I wondered because it felt real. It felt like I was somewhere. Has that ever happened to you where you actually went somewhere in the spirit in a dream?
Not me personally, but I know a few people that have. We had a friend of mine that was helping us with customer service had a dream one night where she knew she was in Italy, and she knew that there was a bomb scare at the school. She was in a school and she had to get the kids out, but she couldn't get them out the way they normally went out. And she knew what way to get them out. And so she's working with the teachers, helping the kids get out. And, I don't know if you've ever been to Europe, but Europe has very strict security standards, where there's a meeting point and everybody knows what that meeting point is. So they were going somewhere else, not to the meeting point. She gets all the kids out, wakes up, and, when she gets, comes out of the dream, she's like, that was really weird. That seems so real. And it just kept on bothering her. And so she looks up the news, comes to find out that there was a bomb scare at a school in Italy. And it would have been about the time, because the time change would have been about the time she was asleep.
Wow.
And she saw in one of the interviews, somebody said something about someone that was wearing what looked like purple pajamas that was helping the kids. And she had been wearing purple pajamas.
Wow.
So I mean that one was cool.
Yeah.
I heard of one where somebody had done something else and then meets the person that they'd met in their dream later, and the person from their dream recognized them. You're the one. You helped. You're the one that saved us.
Wow,
So
that's
cool. I
fascinating.
love that stuff.
Yeah, I do too. So, do you have dreams primarily for yourself, or do you have dreams as part of your prophetic gifting where there's a word or a message for others?
A decent mix, but primarily for myself. Out of all the dreams that I have, it actually goes in seasons. I would say there's been seasons where it was 20-30% was for others, for places that I was going, and then other times where it's less than 10%.
Okay.
I generally, on average, prophetic people, it tends to actually be closer to 10 to 15%. One of the ways that a lot of prophetic dreams actually end up nothing happening out of them is people don't discern that it was actually about them and not a prophecy. And
Okay.
so then they share it as if it was a message and nothing happens. A lot of times it was because the dream was actually about them.
That is a hard thing with dreams because often other people are in our dreams. So, how do you
Right.
describe that to people?
Well, I mean, coming back to what we said about being the focus, participating, or being observer. When you're the focus, meaning that you're the center of activity, you're the person that you went into this room, you talked to this person, and maybe it's somebody that you know or somebody that you're familiar with, and then you interact, you did this. You're the actor in the dream. You're the one that is from the beginning of the dream to the end of the dream. That dream is about you. People come up to me as like, I had a dream about you. I'm like, really? So tell me about the dream. Well, it started out, I was in my house, and then I went, okay, so I wasn't in the dream at the beginning. No, but you're in it. You're in this part. Okay, so now I know this dream is actually not about me, it's about the dreamer.
Okay.
That's the number one way. Now, participating is when there's a group of people. And so you're part of a group of people, you're doing some things, the other people are doing some things, but that group moves through the dream from beginning to end. You're participating in the action, but you're not necessarily the center of the action. Usually those dreams are about a group of people that you're involved with. So it could be your family, could be your church, could be your workplace. Who are those people? Did you recognize them? What was going on? What was the context? And then how much of the dream affected you? And then how much of the dream was you're just part of this group of people will tell you how much the meaning of the dream, the interpretation is going to actually affect your life. Because if it's about a group of people that you're a part of, you're going to be affected by it, but maybe not majorly affected. Maybe it's just minorly affected. And usually how much activity you have in the dream will tell you how much the meaning of that dream is actually going to affect you.
Okay, that's really good. So it sounds like you have a pretty profound interpretation gift, which I admit I do not. If people ask me for help with interpretation, I make several recommendations of what the symbols could mean. I ask a lot of questions and help them and get their interpretation. But I notice in the Bible, Joseph he could just lay out an interpretation, and it sounds like probably Daniel could as well. So most people are not interpreting at the level you are. So what are some basic interpretation principles that you recommend to people who are maybe just getting started?
You know, the absolute best thing someone can do to learn how to interpret dreams is to study the parables of Jesus and the dreams in scripture that have been interpreted and start asking why. Why did Joseph say that three branches being squeezed into 3 cups was 3 days? And why was it different that 3 baskets on top of the baker's head being eaten by birds was also about 3 days? But what was the difference there? Why was one positive and one was negative? How did you get the positive? How did he get the negative? Why was it grapes? Why was it a cup? What did that mean to the dreamer? Why was it, the bread on top of the head? Like all of those, when you start dialing in those things and looking at what that means, Jesus' parable about the 4 soils, you have the wayside. So it's just by the side of the path. You have the rocky ground, you have the thorns and the thistles, and then you have the good ground. Why did Jesus say the wayside represented this? Why did he say the rocky ground? What was the principle that's there? What can we understand about how God uses metaphor? And when you start going through the dreams in scripture and those parables and start finding those keys, it does 2 things. One, because it's the very words of God, there's a spiritual impartation that's happening. Because the words, when we're doing this in relationship with Jesus, the Spirit of God is actually causing it to come alive. And so we're actually getting more than our minds are getting. It's doing something in our spirit that's sensitizing us to the metaphoric language of God. And so that is one piece, but it's also teaching us the principles, because God has self-appointed ways in the way that he does something. So he's not going to have a dream where you drop something and it mean that you're going to pick up something, because dropping and picking up are 2 different things. He's not going to have a dream where you lose something and it mean that you're going to gain something, or the other way where you gain something and it actually mean that you're going to lose something. So there's self-appointed ways, and you can recognize those through how God uses metaphor throughout scripture. So I've literally gone through every dream in scripture, the ones interpreted and not interpreted, and went through, and what does this actually mean to dream interpretation? What can I learn about how God uses dreams from this story about dreams? That right there is going to be a huge, huge help. One of the principles that's related to that, so we talked about focus, participating, and then observing. One of the other things is recognizing what's a focus of a dream. So even if you're the dreamer's not the focus, there's always going to be a focus. So what's the focus of the dream? What are the sub-focuses? What are the essential elements that make the story move forward, that if you took out, you lose the story? Not that you lose nuance of the story, but you completely lose the story. And then what are those elements that are actually just adding to the story, but if you leave them out, you don't lose anything in the story? So, I shared that really long dream that my wife had, walking into the church, seeing John Paul, that whole thing. I could shorten that whole dream to a very short thing that John Paul met her in a bathroom and gave her something for the next season. That's all the essential elements because there was a bathroom, John Paul was there. And even if I leave it out at the bathroom, we could just say that it was in the church because the bathroom was more of a detail. The fact that it was church, because this was about our spiritual life. And the gift, the receiving, that was the most important thing that was there. And so all of those details, now I know what was sub-focus, John Paul, the giving and the receiving, the fact that it was in the church, those were sub-focuses. And then the fact that there were other staff there. If I leave that out of the story, it helps, but it doesn't actually change the plot line. It just adds something to it. So I now know that's detail. If I focus on the details, trying to figure out what the details mean before I've understood the main plot of the story, the dream gets more confusing rather than easier to understand. But when I simplify the dream, I basically can interpret that dream just by reading the plot. John Paul's going to meet you and give you something for the next season.
Yeah, that's
right?
really good.
It just kind of clarifies. And so we've got seminars that go for 21 hours to go through, but those things right there will give somebody that is willing to put the time in. There's so much that you can learn from that, and it'll give you a safe foundation because we've got to be very careful with the way that we go about dream interpretation because there's some really dangerous dream interpretive methods that are out there. Probably the most common type of dream interpretation method out there is Jungian dream philosophy from Carl Jung, who was a psychologist. What a lot of people don't realize is that Jung was discipled by a principality. His journal has been released by his estate, and he wrote out conversations that he had with this spirit that came and taught him very demonic things that was the foundation of his understandings. And trying to use that to be able to interpret a dream from God, there's no way that you're going to get there.
Right.
And I know enough about that. Like I've studied it because I want to be able to communicate. And I'm not just saying that out of fear. Like I've actually read some of the things that are there. I can interpret a dream using the Jungian model. I know it well enough that I can do that. And I can tell you, you cannot interpret a single dream in scripture using that model and get to the same interpretation that God gave the dream.
That's interesting. So is his method basically this means this all the time?
His method it's based on archetypes, what he calls archetypes, that there is, the broader philosophy is that we're all part of this ongoing story. And every story in history is an echo of the great story of humanity finding its potential. And if you get far enough to where he says humanity actually realizes that we are God, we're our own gods. But in that, every dream is just us trying to make sense of our story. And so everything in the dream is an element of the dreamer. So you can recognize a Jungian interpretation when more than one element represents the dreamer. So you have a dream and there's a child that's also in the dream. Well, that's your child self. And there's a motherly figure. Well, that's your maternal nature. And there's a father figure. That's your paternal nature. And there's an animal. Well, that's your animal instincts. So it has this idea that all the different elements of the dream are just representing parts of the dreamer. And when you understand it, then you can get rid of those things that are hindering you from becoming your true self, which would allow you to fully realize human potential. And if you can discover yourself, then you can actually be free and fully realized, and you'll be successful in life. You'll become little God.
So I've seen a lot of anytime I search anything dream related, a ton of AI stuff comes up. I'm actually thinking of doing an episode where I take several dreams and interpret them with humans and then interpret them through AI and see what the differences are. I'm curious, but would you say that the method you're describing from Carl Jung, is it Jung? Is that how you say it?
Jung. Yeah.
Would you say that AI is using that method?
The thing with AI is it depends on the prompt that you use, if you tell it or not. If you don't tell it what method to use, it will most likely use the most common method out there, which would most likely be Carl Jung. Most even psychologists don't really use the Freudian model anymore. It's too difficult to understand, and people have realized it's not as helpful as it was once thought. And so Carl Jung is the most popular. So likely it would use that. A few years ago, I had a friend of mine that sent me something. AI was just kind of getting going, and they'd asked AI to write a thing on dream interpretation based off of the teachings of John Paul Jackson. It was basically Carl Jung. It
Oh,
was
wow.
not, yeah, it was not John Paul's teaching. But recently, using very specifically based off of the teachings of John Paul Jackson, it was very different. It actually was, it was just a summary of what John Paul Jackson's taught that's out there on the internet. So it kind of depends on how you ask it, really.
Okay.
There's one more piece about interpreting dreams.
Yeah.
Probably the most important thing that I would say to anybody that wants to learn how to interpret dreams or really grow in their interpretation is don't rely on what you can learn or what you know. Because Joseph gives us this secret in Genesis chapter 41 when he's talking to the baker and the cupbearer. He says, "Do not interpretations belong to God?"
Yeah.
And then he follows up, "So tell me your dream." But his expectation of being able to understand dreams was not because he knew a lot about dreams. It was because he had a relationship with God and he was asking God. And as I've looked at my own life, when I first started learning about dream interpretation, I got so excited because I was memorizing, well, this symbol means this number means this color means this. And somebody would tell me a dream and I just put it all together and it was hit or miss. But I forgot to go back. Before I knew how to interpret dreams, I was just asking God, well, what are you saying about this? But I started learning and I lost that. And just remembering, if you get a dream or somebody gives you a dream, the first thing to do is not to go look at a dream dictionary. It's not to Google, and please don't Google what a dream means. That's not going to be very helpful. But that's not going to be the first place you look. The first place you look is like, Lord, what are you saying through this dream? What are you communicating with this dream? And letting that be the reliance, because dreams are important because they're one of the ways that God interprets. Now, not every dream is from God, but those dreams that are from God, their value is not because they're a dream. Their value is because God's speaking. And if God is speaking, then it's actually worth it to go find out what it means. There's something that's more real that's happening because this is the God that gave life. This is the God that created the universe, that formed me, that redeemed you and I so that we could be in relationship. And dreams are one of the ways that he develops that relationship. It's one of the ways that he speaks. It's not the most important way, but it's an essential way because it is a way that he speaks. And so holding this whole thing of dream interpretation in our relationship with him is absolutely essential. And it's one of the easiest things to lose once we start learning, because we start to rely on our understanding rather than on our relationship. So I just say anybody that's trying to learn about dreams, I want to encourage you to trust. Even if you don't know anything about dreams, God can tell you what it means.
Yeah, that's really good.
Do you mind if I share something? I don't know if you want to keep this in the recording or not, but that'd be up to you. But can I share something with you?
Yeah, please do.
This journey that you've been on with the Lord is a really beautiful thing that God has begun. He's unlocking things that have been in you since you were a little girl, 5, 6 years old. There were things that he did in your life. And I don't know if this is a cognizant thing or if this is something that was just that he just deposited in you in the night. But I can actually, I see these little treasures that have been deposited in you. And that's part of your hunger. Because he formed you for this. It's not just a curiosity. It's not just something that you found out that you're like, wow, this is interesting. this is actually a calling that God put in you from a very early age. And as you continue to grow in this, what you're doing is you're awakening things in the hearts of people. And your genuine hunger to understand and your curiosity is inspiring curiosity in others that are going to help them to have encounters. And there's people that have already started to hear the voice of God that didn't know that they could hear from God because of what you've done, but that's going to continue. And there are people that are going to find a relationship with him because they awaken to the fact that God can meet them in their dreams because of what you're doing. And don't use that to change anything about the way that you're doing it. You're doing it the way you're supposed to right now, because it's about who you are and your personality that has the impact that you have. But I want to encourage you, because when we got this invitation, sometimes I look at people's websites. I'm like, I'm not so sure I want to do that. My first thought was, wow, there's something of the Lord on this, and I need to be a part of it. So whatever, if that's just encouragement, if that's confirmation, that's what I'm looking for. Whatever that is, bless you in what you're doing, and may the Lord continue to increase the reach that you have. It's good.
Wow. Thank you so much. I received that. I'm really thankful for John's time sharing with us and hope that you picked up some inspiration and helpful insight from what he shared. If you have a dream to contribute or that you need help interpreting, please reach out to me using the contact button on my website, www.thenightlife-podcast.com. Also, let me know if you're interested in sharing via audio or video recording, if you have recommendations for future episodes, or are interested in being interviewed on the show. In Jeremiah 33:3, God says, "Call to me, and I'll answer you, and show you great and mighty things which you do not know." Be encouraged that this invitation is for you and me today, as much as it was for Jeremiah thousands of years ago. Thanks for listening.